Welcome to the Practice You podcast. My name is Elena Brower. Let's dive into today's conversation regarding life's myriad transitions and how we refine our responses in our relationships, our wellness, our households, our work, and in our practices. You are invited to learn and love and listen with me. Welcome to Practice You. Welcome back to the podcast. I have a dear friend with me here who has had a giant influence on my life, who has helped me to see my own potential, whose work has changed millions of lives. Her name is Megan Dalla Camina, and she is the founder of Women Rising. This is a global women's empowerment company supporting hundreds of thousands of women through leadership, education, and transformational growth. She's a PhD researcher in women's spirituality. She brings more than 30 years of experience in executive leadership and entrepreneurship into her work, guiding women to reclaim their feminine power. Megan weaves ancient wisdom, embodied practice, and modern science to help women awaken. Yes, I'm talking to you, our dear listener, to the truth of who you are. She's also the best-selling author of 4 books, including Women Rising, which we're about to talk about now. The subtitle of this book, The Forces That Hold Us Back, The Tools to Help Us Rise. And Simple, Soulful, Sacred, A Woman's Guide to Clarity, Comfort, and Coming Home to Herself. But Women Rising is where we're going to focus our attention today. And dear listener, if you would like to check it out as you listen, go to womenrisingbook.com. She also has a free guide to awakening feminine wisdom, and that's at Megan's website, megandallacamina.com, and that is MEGANDALLACAMINA.com. Check her out. Welcome, Megan, to the podcast.
Hello, my beautiful friend. I'm
Hello.
Smiling from ear to ear. So happy to be here with you.
Yeah, same. Got a big, tall order of many folded pages in your book. I'm going to go in chronological order because I think it's cool. I'm going to read the table of contents. That feels important to me as well. You can hear the pages turning. Da-da-da. Part 1, the forces that hold us back. And there are paradoxes of power that Megan gets into: the empowerment paradox, the confidence paradox, the motherhood paradox, the success paradox, the leadership paradox, and the visibility paradox. And then there's a section called What About the Men? And this is important in Megan's work. Part 2, the stories that keep us stuck. And this I find very interesting. The inner patriarch, the shoulds, the musts, and the have-tos. The voice inside your head, the inner critic, of course. The power of archetypes. We go through the 13 archetypes of the inner critic. You will be amazed at how many of these, dear listener, with which you can identify. We're going from the perfectionist to the beauty queen, the skeptic to the imposter, the people pleaser, the outsider. That was me. The comparer, the good girl, also me. The overachiever, also me. The self-doubter, the chameleon, me. The empath, the ideal mother. And part 3 is the tools to help us rise. And we'll go through the sort of traversing the landscape from inner critic to inner wisdom, a vision for your life, the path of purpose, cultivating conscious confidence, your career evolution, being an authentic leader, creating intentional well-being. You know, this is a rich tome, if you will. And if you are working in any space where you are helping women rise, I want to recommend this book to you. Do not miss it. It's called Women Rising. And I just want to say, Megan, thank you for your work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
That means everything coming from you.
It's true. I'm going to skip past the empowerment paradox to the confidence paradox, because the paradox is really funny. It says, be confident, but not too confident.
Mm.
Oh, God. And I'm just going to read this section and then we can chat about it. As I was presenting my research on the specific challenges women face at work in my keynote speech later that day. And by the way, Megan is like in school right now, getting a master's. Like, this is a forever student, which is why we're really good friends. As I was presenting my research on the specific challenges women face at work in my keynote speech later that day, I watched him shift uncomfortably in his seat as I shared the data about gender bias, the double bind, and the impact on confidence, and why telling women to, quote, just be more confident is unhelpful at best and harmful at worst. The women in the room, of course, understood what I was saying as I watched their knowing expressions, nods, and ever so slight smiles of acknowledgement. I left wondering if the male CEO got the message or if it sailed right by him, as it does with so many leaders. I'd love to hear about what happened there and how the confidence paradox has played out in your world, because I know how it's playing out in mine.
The confidence paradox is really interesting. And the reason I wrote this first part of the book, The Forces That Hold Us Back, is because with the thousands and thousands and thousands of women that I work with, and in my own career as well, you know, women think it's just their fault. You know, they think if they don't put their hand up, if they don't go for the promotion, if they don't start the business, if they don't write the book, that it's on us, that it's just us. And what I really wanted to land here is that this is the structure that we have been born and raised and cultivated within. This society that tells women who to be, how to behave, what to do. And the confidence paradox of, you know, women being told, yeah, like, we want you to be confident, but don't be too confident. You know, we're going to snap you down if you do that. And this male CEO, the preface to that story is I was giving a keynote and then was on a panel with him, and the panelist asked, you know, what's your one piece of advice for the women in the room, 500 women in the room? And he said, oh, they just need to be more confident. And I hear this, I work with more than 700 organizations around the world, and I hear this day in, day out. And it is so limiting for women, because then we think, oh, well, it's just us. And if I could just fix myself, then I would have all of the riches in the world, when in fact, this is patriarchy. This is the world that we live in. And when we can see that, and we can see those forces outside of ourselves, I find that women exhale. They start to realize, oh, it's not just me. And yes, there are things that I can do, but I also need to deeply realize that this is the environment in which I live and have been raised. And yeah, it's a softening place. It's the patriarchy.
And it's internalized. Like, we all have it. It's so ingrained in us we can't even smell it anymore.
Yes. And that is what we do. We take external patriarchy, we internalize it, and it becomes our inner critic voice that rules our lives and controls all of our actions. And as you say, and as I write about, so much of the time we're not even aware that this is going on for us.
Yeah. The motherhood paradox binds women to impossible standards and lays the groundwork for the endless guilt that working mothers face. When we're at work, we feel guilty for not being with our kids. And when we're with our kids, we feel guilty that we're not working and worried we'll fall behind, not meet expectations, or fail. Endless exhaustion are the words that you use. I also want to point out our listener and your reader that there are reflection questions at the end of every single one of these sections. And again, I want to emphasize, should you be teaching, you will have in one book many workshops and ideas and prompts for your humans with whom you're working. But one of the reflection questions in the motherhood paradox was one that I flagged for myself. If you're a working mother, when have you felt the pressures of this paradox in your own work and life? How did it affect you? If you're not a working mother, have you witnessed the paradox in your workplace or amongst friends and colleagues? What have you observed? And I think that's very interesting to just think about. It's not something we consciously consider, but the motherhood paradox is so present. I think right now, my kid is 18 and he's already in college, and I'm promising you, think back to when he was 8, 9, 10, and I was building a couple of different businesses. And I took him most places with me. But at a certain point, we had to stop because school became the priority. And I still run through these weird tendrils of guilt. I can feel them in my bloodstream. And I know to let them go, that they're just constructs of the mind. But that's also part of the internalized patriarchy with which we are living.
Yes, yes. I so relate. I mean, I was a single mother. My son's now 24, doing his master's degree in teaching. Crazy how the time goes. I didn't know it at the time, but I had endless guilt, endless, of this construct of, again, women being told who we should be and how, that gets baked into every aspect of our lives, especially as mothers, and especially if we work outside the home. And it pervades our workplaces. It pervades our businesses.
I want to review the archetypes because I think this is important for our listener. I know it's been important for me to read this book and start to consider where these live in my life. You give us a suggested approach on page 117, which also happens to be my mom's number. Review the archetypes. Read through them with a curious mind and an open heart. Reflect on the stories, characteristics, light and shadow side, inner critic narratives. Take an initial note of those that resonate with you because you see yourself in them or feel pulled to them. And it might be more of a feeling than a cognitive reaction. And then reflect and relate. And then contextualize. You give instructions for each of these. Journal. Document your observations. How this specific archetype influences your feelings and actions in the past or today. Challenge and practice as you move through it. And into part 3 of the book, you'll actually receive strategies and tools to challenge the stories of the inner critic and practice new approaches to build self-efficacy, confidence, and movement in the direction of your current goals. And you offer a gentle reminder before we get into the archetypes. You say, we're not trying to silence or eradicate these archetypes or the inner critic entirely. These are facets of your being, and they're often there to protect or motivate you, albeit in often negative ways. What we do want is to create a healthier relationship with our inner critic by raising our awareness, building understanding, and learning how to create more positive and life-affirming inner narratives that support our path. So let's begin. Of these 13 archetypes, I've picked 4 that I think are closest to me. I get the perfectionist, the outsider, the comparer, and the skeptic. So interesting. Can you relate, Megan, and maybe tell us what your few are that resonate with you?
Thank you for sharing yours. It's always so interesting to look at them and get that insight into where you're at. I am absolutely a reformed people pleaser. So I've worked on my people pleaser for a very long time. It is one of the most common ones that I find for women, as is the perfectionist, by the way. I am also hard and fast the overachiever. And as I was writing the chapter, I was writing the description of the overachiever and all of the information. Then I was like, oh my goodness, like that's me on a page. I still struggle with this, and I find that so many women do. The empath has been one for me, and then the ideal mother. I find that most women who've read the book or done this work with me would relate to, 4 or 5, and there'll be a couple that will really stand out, that you'll sort of get that kind of gut punch.
I think I'm also getting the gut punch on the overachiever and the good girl and the imposter.
Yes.
Like, how could I? Why would I?
Yes.
Do I have a right to do this? So interesting.
And have you noticed that these, in different phases of your life and your journey, that different ones have really come to the fore for you?
Yeah, for sure. It's an interesting thing to think about the past and the present and see how, the past was so much the imposter. And the present is I'm still on the healing edge of the perfectionist. I still so sort of misuse my time in this archetype when I'm kind of a victim of this archetype. And Brene Brown, you quote her from The Gifts of Imperfection. You quote her on page 125. Perfection is not about healthy achievement and growth. Perfection is the belief that if we live perfect, look perfect, and act perfect, and by the way, shouldn't that be perfectly? No offense. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Brene.
The grammar police and me are just jumping right now.
We won't tell her.
We won't. If we live perfectly, look perfectly, and act perfectly, we can minimize or avoid the pain of blame, judgment, and shame. Yeah, it's a 20-ton shield that we carry around thinking it will protect us when, in fact, it's the thing that's actually preventing us from flight. So interesting. If you're listening and you have the perfection, there is a light side. I like this, that you go into the light side and the shadow side. The light side are, exceptional achievements, attention to detail, discipline and drive, continuous improvement, dependability. I'm definitely going to be where I say I'm going to be, and that's part of this, for better or for worse. But the shadow side is endless self-doubt, which I've worked on, the toll of perfectionism, this unattainable situation that can lead to stress, burnout, and even anxiety, and even depression. Difficulty delegating. I worked on that a lot in my 30s. Forgotten self-care. Menopause brought me into full alignment with taking care of myself, thank God. And the shadow side also includes an inflexible approach. And I'm sure, dear listener, you know somebody who's like that. She just won't move because it has to be her way. And we don't have to talk about it too much, but it's just an interesting thing to think about and just watch and know, if I go back to my NVC for a moment, nonviolent communication, like how human of us to think that way, how human of us to engage with these archetypes in such a thorough, ridiculous way.
I think it's really interesting that you brought up midlife and menopause as well, because I find, so much of my community is in that stage as I am, as I'm sure yours is as well. And I think, what I see is that these archetypes take on a whole nother layer for us as women going through midlife. And that space of, am I really going to keep doing these things to myself? Am I really going to keep sitting in the same stories, or am I going to use this threshold of my life to create a new story, a better story, a more healing story for myself? And that's certainly been my experience.
Yeah, I think you get to a certain, at least in my experience, I've gotten to a certain age and now I'm just like, all right, I have officially stopped caring about what other people think about me or putting attention there. I have officially stopped doubting that I'm, good enough to do the job that I'm doing, and I just study a lot and I apply it to studentship as you do. We have this in common. I wonder, Megan, if any of the archetypes that you're working with now of the inner critic, any one that you feel it might be relevant to talk about it, how it manifests, and what the sort of inquiries and maybe even some of the healing that's happened for you might be instructive for our listener.
I think about the people pleaser because it's one that it just riddles through so many women's lives. And, the archetypal story is I want them to like me, and I'm constantly trying to harmonize. And how many women spend their entire lives taking care of, making peace, making sure that the feathers aren't ruffled, making sure that nobody's upset, that we contort ourselves to do that. And that when we realize that so much of what we do and so much of the way that we live our lives is to please other people, to pacify other people, I find that there is this very awakening moment where we can see the light side of that, that we're the ones that you want to have around. We're the ones who are going to take care of things. We're the ones who are going to keep the peace when things are really heated. We're the ones who aren't going to say no. But when we really feel into the shadow side of that, which is at what cost to myself am I pleasing other people, that becomes a very healing journey. And I think it's one that for so many women, that's a journey that we need to be on.
Yeah. I made myself a note to go over to the compare as well, mostly because of the state of our society right now and the pervasive nature of social media. And, I happen to not spend a whole lot of time there. I really enjoy creating the feed for my own delight. It's like a vision board. I've talked about this before for me. But the shadow side of the compare is a very real situation. And for our listener, it gets into persistent self-doubt. Habitual comparison creates literally a backdrop of self-doubt. It creates deep-rooted insecurity, constant benchmarking against others. Raise your hand if this is you. Perfectionism, again, the search for the unattainable, leading to dissatisfaction. Excessive self-criticism. You can figure that out. Mental fatigue. Gosh, think about it. I mean, I've had that at several intervals recently. Just mental fatigue. It's so much information. You go on to say on page 179, the comparer's inner critic thrives on the patriarchal conditioning that women compete against each other and critically judge each other's every move. This is not acceptable anymore.
Yeah.
I am no longer willing to be a part of upholding this structure. I want to be a part of the structures that help women realize that we can all get along, that we do not have to compare each other. I have no hair on my head. How am I going to compare myself with somebody who has a beautiful head of hair? There's no point to that. It can go into brain power and intelligence. It can go into the size of your waist or breasts. I mean, we must cease immediately and realize there is a whole world of women. We all have the same heartbeat, the same organs, roughly, the same mind. Why don't we use it to uphold each other, support each other, uplift each other? Gosh.
It is an epidemic of our time. And it's always been bad. I mean, I'm sure you remember being at school and, we didn't have social media. We're the same age, thank goodness for that.
Thank goodness. I don't know what I would have done, honestly. I wouldn't have barely had the wherewithal to walk home by myself without getting bullied and ruined for 2 days.
Yeah, same. But when we look at, the benefits of social media, great. And we used to have to deal with just the media. But now with social media, again, like it is so in the fabric of our society now, of our psyche, that we scroll, we look, we compare. We scroll, we look, we compare. And whether you are working at home, I remember comparing when I was the young mum dropping my son off for school and then racing off to the office and everyone else was going to play tennis, and how did I stack up there? And we look at what it's doing to our kids, particularly our girls, with this constant comparison. And it's time for us as women to do this work. I get asked by women in our community all of the time, can you please do work for our daughters? Because they're all dealing with this. And I say, maybe, hopefully one day I will get to do that in my body of work. But for now, the best work that you can do for your daughter is to do this work yourself. And to go through and really understand this, understand how these archetypes show up for you, do your work, because they're watching you, and your stories.
Whenever I give myself empathy, even if my kid is kind of, not quite treating me with the respect that we both deserve, I give myself empathy and he begins to soften. I haven't told him how to do things. I haven't, chastised him for being mean or whatever. I've just given myself empathy silently. And almost instantly there's a deep shift in him.
Yes.
And I can't imagine that it would be really wonderful to see, if I had a daughter, what the change would be for her being also a woman. It'd be so interesting. Page 237, A Vision for Your Life. This is really sweet. And our listener, I really want you to hear this. This is a section in which, if you've been kind of stuck or stagnant, the moment you begin reading this section, you're going to start to see sort of a through line to what it is that you want to do. And there are some really good prompts in here regarding exactly steps to reflect, claim your energy, to recognize influences on your energy. Moving into page 243, following your joy, defining success. Like, what does that actually mean to you? And what are your barometers? Because it doesn't matter what it means to me or to anyone else. What does it mean to you? Identifying any obstacles, and then really beginning to envision your future. This really inspired me. I started to think about, there are a couple of things that I have on my horizon, Megan, that in reading the book and going through it, literally every page in this section is underlined and dog-eared. I started to have a vision for my 501c3 when I was reading this book, which is an organization that actually is a charity, basically. And I want to start collecting money to then distribute to all of my favorite causes. It makes so much sense to me. And I can just be raising money all the time. And I can be funneling some of the pay that I receive instead of taking it into my bank account, paying taxes on it, and then deciding where it goes. I can actually funnel it directly into this organization and use it for good. It's an unbelievable shift in my understanding of my life. So, listener, what is the vision for your life? You're going to come up with ideas you can't even imagine, you didn't even think of when you read this book. I'm so grateful, Megan.
Oh, that's so wonderful to hear. I'm going through it for myself again as well right now for my vision, having just spent a month traveling in Europe. And what I see for a lot of women is that we either are living with an old vision and an old model of success, or we don't have one at all because we're just so busy, right? We're so busy doing all of the things, taking care of all of the people, focusing on everybody else. And that's why this work is so important, for us to really think about, where is my joy? It is one of the questions in the Women Rising program that I teach. It is the question more than any other question that gets women stuck, when they have to really think, where is the joy in my life? And for so many of us, we have to cultivate that joy. You know, we have to get very intentional and mindful about that joy, because otherwise it just gets lost, doesn't it? And so does the vision. So it's really important work.
It's very sweet that you brought up joy, because this is kind of where your direction took me to this idea of creating a charity of my own, was the joy that I get from directing money to places where it's really needed and living more leanly myself and just realizing what my real priorities are. For our listener, we do have prompts in here where you're going to be asked to really think on what the blend is for your work and your life, what your sort of financial security goals feel and look like. It's not confronting necessarily, but it is very important as women that we are having this conversation in a supportive space so that we can assess, you know, what we have at our disposal, what the constraints are, as you say, and really define the path forward.
Something that you said, and it must have been, gosh, I think it was about 15 years ago, Elena, and you were talking about how you checked your bank account every day. And that was a revelation to me, because I, like so many other women, would just, you know, oh, I don't want to look at that. I don't want to know. I don't want to see what's in there. You know, I'm not sure I'm being, you know, financially responsible. And that never left me, that you had said that and shared that. So I want to thank you for that. And I agree that this is such an important area for women. at all ages and stages, but particularly as we come through midlife, to really understand, where am I at? Where is my security? Where is my sovereignty around my
Yeah.
finances?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Thank you.
Of course. I have good teachers, but in case you're listening to this and you're wondering why on earth would I want to look at my bank account every day? Well, it's an interesting practice. It is a practice. I was avoiding it for so long. I just would look when I had to, and, things got lost and underdone and overdone, and there were mistakes made throughout my 20s into my 30s before I started doing this practice. Now, I know exactly what's in there, and I'm deeply motivated to create opportunities for myself to grow what's in there and to uphold it. I check my credit cards at least every other day to make sure there's nothing sketchy or out of place in the charges. And I've caught a few things over the last several years, nothing much, but now there are so many security measures in place on the cards, on the side of the company. But I've caught some things. What's interesting about it is it's really just a level of financial literacy that not a lot of us were taught as girls. And, I think there's a lot of wisdom there.
Yes. And so much power.
Yeah.
So much power
And so
for us
much
as women.
power. Yes.
Yeah.
On page 253, in the Path of Purpose section, you talk about 4 ways to make meaning at work. 1, connecting your work to service. Okay, I'd like to talk about that for a moment, this idea of making a positive impact, even in the realm of what is essentially commerce. How does that work for you? How do you feel about it personally, Megan?
Yeah, this is a big one. Again, like, where do we find our joy? Where do we find our purpose? And one of the first scientifically studied ways of doing it is, how are we being of service? For me, that is being of service to my community of women that I serve, and men and male allies, which is a really important part of the work we do at Women Rising. And it is, really leads everything that I do. Is, for the sake of what, is a question I ask myself all of the time when it comes to work, whether I'm writing or speaking or creating something new. For the sake of what, who is this going to serve? And of course, I run a business, so things need to serve the team and the business and all of that. But the first question is always, who's going to benefit from this? Where are the women? How is this going to serve the women? And that is the guiding purpose of my life, of everything that I do. And I find that when we can really lock in on that, and for some listeners, that will be is to pay the rent. For the sake of what I do this and I do this work is to pay the rent and to take care of my family. Beautiful clarity. For others, there may be a different purpose of where we find that service. You speak so beautifully about the service and your philanthropy and your humanity in serving communities. It's a really important and directional question for us to ask ourselves.
Yeah. And I think that's an ongoing conversation. I don't think that one ends. You figure out how you're serving people and your job, and then suddenly you realize, what, I'd really like to do this other thing that's volunteer, outside of my work. And then I have so much joy in my heart. I only spend a few hours a week serving, but I have so much joy around it. It feeds me, to mentor women who can't pay for it, to go to the hospice, to go to the penitentiary. These things feed me.
Yeah, they
it's
really
not
do.
A lot of time.
Yeah.
And
it can look like different things. I mean, the other way that it really shows up for me is in my PhD work. For someone who wanted to get kicked out of school, I was laughing about this with my mother yesterday. Who would have thought that I'd be 54 doing a PhD? But that's also part of my service because, this next body of work is all around feminine wisdom and women's spirituality, which is a deep part of my own work. How do I use that to serve others? How does my journey and my learnings and my research serve other women on their path?
The second bit in the Path of Purpose on page 253 is exploring job crafting. And I thought it would be interesting to talk about that. It struck me, even though I'm my own, I'm self-employed and I've been so for, like 2 decades now. The idea here, you write, is not to change your job in its entirety, but to make small, meaningful adjustments that align your daily tasks more closely with what brings you joy and fulfillment. And I wonder if you have any examples of that or how you would advise a woman listening to go about that.
Yeah, so if you're working for someone else, I work with a lot of women who work in, corporate environments or government environments. They may not be able to change their job, but they may be feeling bored or unsatisfied, or they need more joy or, more purpose and meaning. So it can be looking at, well, is there a special project that you can take on? Is there an initiative at work you can get involved in that will keep your core job the same, but start crafting to bring in other elements that are inspiring or exciting or interesting to you? I did this when I was head of strategy at IBM because I'd been in that role for many years and I was just feeling really stale. And this is 20 years ago now. That's when I first got really involved with gender diversity and with women's leadership and with positive psychology. And I started to weave those things into my day job so that I was crafting the role that I was in. And if you're in your own business, you will have core responsibilities, core things that you need to do to, earn money, to serve your clients. But where's the interest? Where's the excitement? Where are the butterflies? What's the next thing? That may not mean that you're going to completely pivot in your business, but that you have that job crafting piece where you are bringing in other elements that will bring in that excitement and interest for you and may turn into their own purposeful path.
Yeah.
Which is what happened for me.
It's very cool. I can say for sure that I never put words to it, but I did that at a few of the jobs that I did hold before I was my own employer. And it did change a lot. Right out of college, I was hired to be a textile designer, woven textiles for menswear. And all of a sudden, we were doing some presentations and sales, and I was part of the presentations because I was a designer, and I started making vision boards, like storyboards for the seasons. And that became my job. And it was something that brought me so much joy. I had to go out and spend $100 on really cool magazines and, make vision boards for each one of the sort of separate line categories. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And by the end of my work there, I was a visual person, not just doing the sort of grunt work of designing the weaves and the warps and wefts, but actually creating art that helped with sales. And it was really fun. I just realized that is an example of this.
Yes.
So funny.
Yeah. And it can completely change careers and businesses by doing this. It doesn't need to. It can simply be for the purpose of bringing more meaning into your work. But it can also create entire new pathways that you may never have seen before.
I think in this business now that I'm in, there are so many sort of branches to the tree, as it were. But asking myself this question year over year and realizing, you know what? My strength right now is not in leading a giant community. It's in mentoring people one-on-one or in small groups and just holding space, similar to what I do in the volunteer placements that I have. And changing that element of my work, shutting down the big mentorship and opening up small group mentorship in a structure called Hive. I have so much joy on Tuesdays when I meet with my little hives. I cannot tell you. So I think I understand that too from the perspective of now as well, which is quite nice.
Yes. And it's allowing ourselves to make those shifts. You had such a successful major, platform and mentoring business, and allowing ourselves to say, you know what, right now, here's how I want to serve. I want it to be smaller, not bigger. Or I want it to look like this, not that. And I'm going through that at the moment as well with some revisioning of my business. And it's giving ourselves permission to do that work, to get that clarity, and then to follow where that joy is leading us, where we feel our purposeful work is. Takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, it does. And, I think what the magic of this book is that it puts all of these ideas into words on a page and helps us to see that all of this is completely possible. You included a really sweet little bookmark with the book. I think this is a wonderful way to close. And I'll ask if you have anything else you'd like to share, but this is a beautiful, almost closing salvo. Together, we can create a new future for women. And that starts with you and your own empowerment journey. It's your time to rise. Anything else that you'd like to add that maybe we haven't touched on? I like to keep these brief, but I don't want to miss anything that you feel is important.
I think you've done such a beautiful, beautiful job of guiding us through. I'm so, so grateful. I'm so grateful for you, Elena. You have always been a mentor, a friend, someone who really inspires me in not what you do, but in who you are and in how you show up in the world. And yeah, I'm just grateful. Thank you so much for sharing this work, which I really, truly feel is important work with your beautiful community.
Yeah, it is. I think this is going to help countless women. And also, just by osmosis, all of the people with whom they come into contact, whether it's an employer or an employee or a friend or a child or a parent, there's something about this that feels so supportive and nurturing, and it's generating a mood that I'm feeling in my body. Your work that I really appreciate. So thank you again.
Thank you, my friend.
Yeah. And again, for our listener, if you want to look at Megan, Dallacamina.com, MEGANDALLACAM, as in Mary, INA.com. And her book, to look it up, is Women, plural, risingbook.com. Thank you again, friend and sister. I love you so much.
I love you. Thank you.
Thank you.